Welcome to Story Chat Radio. We are book editors Carly Hayward and Jenny Chappelle. Every month we watch a different movie with an eye for storytelling and novel writing.
We use our years of training and experience editing novels to break down each movie's storytelling elements to help you improve your novel in progress.
Warning, Jenny ruins everything.
Hey, you ruin things too.
So don't be surprised if there are spoilers. On this episode, we are discussing The Shape of Water, and then we'll end with a critique of One Lucky Author's Query.
Here come the spoilers. Elisa lives a very routine, boring life as a cleaner at a secret government facility in Baltimore, Maryland in 1962. And this is kind of at the height of the Cold War. Her only friends are her closeted next-door neighbor, Giles, and her co-worker, Zelda. The facility where she works receives a mysterious creature captured from a South American river. He was captured by Colonel Strickland, who's kind of the villain, not kind of, he is the villain. He's a very nasty villain, who is in charge of the project, and he captured this creature to study it. So Elisa's curious about the creature, and she discovers it's like a humanoid amphibian, which is a nice way of saying he's a fish man, basically. She begins visiting him in secret, and the two of them form a close bond as Elisa is mute, and so she only uses sign language, and she communicates with him by teaching him signs. So we find out that Strickland plans to vivisect the creature. There's another doctor at the facility, Dr. Hofstetler, who's secretly a Russian spy, and he pleads with Strickland to keep the creature alive for further study, but at the same time, he's also been ordered by his Soviet handlers to euthanize the creature. So when Elisa overhears about the Americans' plans for the amphibian man, she persuades her friends, Giles and Zelda, and then even the Dr. Hofstetler, to help her free him. She keeps the creature in her bathtub, which I just thought is adorable. It's so adorable. Planning to release him into a nearby canal in several days when it's scheduled to rain. Their relationship grows deeper, but the amphibian man's health deteriorates even as we see that he has the ability to heal. Strickland interrogates Elisa and Zelda, among others, but learns nothing. After he tortures Hofstetler into revealing that they all work together to break out the creature, Strickland threatens Zelda at home, and her husband reveals that Elisa has the amphibian man. Zelda immediately telephones Elisa, warning her to release the creature, and enraged, Strickland ransacks Elisa's empty apartment, where he finds a calendar note revealing where she plans to release the amphibian man. Down at the canal, Elisa and Giles are bidding farewell to the creature when Strickland arrives, knocks Giles down, shoots the amphibian man and Elisa. Like I said, he's mean, nasty villain.
Yeah, super unnecessary to also shoot Elisa.
It really was. The amphibian man quickly heals himself and then slashes Strickland's throat and kills him. The police arrive on the scene with Zelda, and at the same time, the amphibian man takes Elisa and jumps into the canal where he heals her. When he applies his healing ability underwater to the scars on her neck, they open to reveal gills like his. She jolts back to life, and the two embrace. And then in a closing voiceover, Giles conveys his belief that Elisa lived happily ever after and remained in love with the amphibian man. So, Carly, what did you think of the movie?
Sorry, I just love the ending. I loved it, and I'm very late to the party, so to speak, with this movie. I always wanted to see it, and I just never did, and I'm very glad I finally had a reason to see it, besides, wanting to, because I never do things just because I want to do them.
Right.
It's hard when you're busy. But I loved it. I do love Guillermo del Toro a lot, but somehow this one worked for me way more than his other films like Pan's Labyrinth and
it's that strong romance element, I think.
I know, I love a good romance.
You do. So I think that's really what makes it better for you.
Yeah. I mean, because I love Beauty and the Beast and Romeo and Juliet, and it had super strong retelling vibes of that, especially Beauty and the Beast. I think it's very specifically a retelling of that, but it was just beautiful. I was hooked from the beginning, especially with all the magical realism, especially in that first scene where her apartment is full of water and everything's kind of floating. It really sets this magical, I mean, I guess it is magical realism, but magical, unbelievable scene that is just like very engaging. It pulled me right in. I was like ready to go.
Right.
And I couldn't wait to see how that kind of came to play in a not more realistic way, but in a further on in the story kind of a way, especially when they have their fill up her bathroom with water and have their little sex scene. But yeah, and I also loved the framing of the story with Giles being the one to tell the story. I think was really nice and kind of added a fantastical element to it where you don't know how much of it is real, how much of it actually happened, especially the end. He doesn't know that she was actually healed. I think that's more of a hope. I just loved it, and don't even get me started on how much I loved Elisa. She was fabulous.
She was fabulous.
What'd you think?
Yeah, same. So I had watched this movie. I didn't see it when it was in theaters, but I think we watched it not long after when it came out on DVD. And I liked it then, and watching it again, you know, watching a movie for enjoyment is very different than watching it to like analyze it.
Right.
And also the more you watch something or if you read books multiple times, then you pick up on different things than what you saw before. So yeah, I am a big Del Toro fan too. I even like his horror movies, and I don't really like horror movies, as we've established.
Yep, same.
But yeah, it definitely has that like eerily beautiful, surreal aesthetic. Like we see in his other movies, even though it isn't visually as dark as most of his other movies are. Like Pan's Labyrinth, Hellboy, like those movies are just visually very dark.
Yes.
And this one really isn't. There's actually like, there's it's sort of muted tones with these kind of bright pops of color. But it does give it that real surreal, magical kind of quality. The actors are brilliant. I think 3 of the main actors were nominated for Academy Awards out of this. The sound is used really creatively in this film as well. I think in part because of the water element. Also because the 2 main characters don't speak aloud. So it also means there isn't a lot of dialogue in the movie. The use of sign language in the film is really integral to the story and adds like this whole other layer of complexity. But I think that the thing that resonates with me the most is that Elisa sees humanity in what many others only see as a monster. And I often don't like monster movies because I feel bad for the monsters. So this movie is a really nice twist on that sort of standard monster movie for me. And I love that the monster gets his happily ever after. Poor Godzilla will never ever get that.
No.
So yeah, I really liked it too. I think there's a lot to like about this movie. Both in the entertainment sense and also just the writing, the acting, all of the technical aspects of it as well. So what did the movie do well that writers can use in their own work?
So you actually kind of already touched on it a little bit, but it's definitely theme. There's so many themes in this movie, and they're all beautifully done. So to me, at least, the 2 main big ones are being silenced and voiceless, and then the classic "who is the real monster here" kind of a theme. But we get a lot of other subtler themes that kind of stem from these 2. So there's like the theme of art and movies and how they can be a way to express yourself, which we see in that small scene where Elisa is able to sing and dance with her amphibian man. As well as through Giles's art and things like that. Then there's the power of silence and other ways to make yourself heard, which we can see through the sign language, but also a lot through the body language, which is like really on point in this movie. Then there's how the other can be scary, but it doesn't mean it's bad. It's just different. We see that obviously with the Amphibian Man, but we also see it with Elisa and Giles and just all of the other characters that are marginalized for different reasons.
Right.
And there's a lot of struggle for power and freedom and how those two things, that's not a good word, but you know what I'm trying to say, interact with each other. How does power and freedom, how do those with power strip freedom away from others? How do people who are wanting freedom struggle to gain some sort of power to allow themselves to have it? Things like that. I can really go on and on about all the themes, but those were the ones that kind of like really stood out to me.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I totally agree with you about all of those. And yeah, go me. I did sort of touch on that already.
You did.
I led us right into that.
It was so smooth. What a transition.
So theme is one of those writing concepts that feels really vague. I think because it's more abstract than, say, plot or character. Like we know a character is the person that something happens to. And then the plot is what happens. But it's hard to pinpoint theme by choosing specific words in the text or, something like that. And it's hard. It makes it hard for writers to break it down in their own writing. It's almost like theme is a feeling more than a defined element. But that's what good writing can do. It keeps the author from showing their presence by immersing the reader in the story or the viewer in the case of a movie. The good news is that although theme feels more abstract, you can definitely learn about it and practice techniques to refine theme in your writing. Theme isn't the same as condensing your plot into a short phrase, though, like a log line. And it's not the same thing as tropes. It's related to those things, but it's different. So what is theme exactly? Theme is a deeper layer of meaning that underlies the expressed elements of the story, like plot, character, dialogue, etc., and speaks to an aspect of the human condition that is larger than any one character or story. Now, I just had to read that because I worked really hard on that.
It was very good phrasing, and I loved it. So good job.
I worked very hard on it, so it would be all-encompassing. So when you're trying to figure out the main theme of a story, it can really help to try to define the theme in just one word, or in just a short phrase. Like, so Carly's examples were who is the real monster and being silenced and voiceless. So these are just very short phrases. Sometimes you can't even get it down to like one word. So, for example, romance stories often have a theme that is love, unsurprisingly.
Love, you say.
Right. Now, under that main theme, we can have several sub-themes like family, grief, those other aspects that sort of feed into that main theme. So the other super important element of theme is that it ties to your character arc and plot, and because of that, it needs to span the entire story.
Yes.
So I think it's really important to make sure that that's why it's important to have an idea of what your theme is, so that you can make sure that it encompasses the whole story.
Yes, you want all your elements working towards it. So, how do we see the themes that we discussed throughout the movie? So some are super apparent while others can be a little subtle. So let's start with voicelessness first. We see that very overtly and literally in Elisa and how she is mute. She literally can't talk or even convey things unless she has someone there to aid her. Or she can resort to stronger methods of communication. We see it with the Amphibian Man, of course, and how he can't communicate. And he's literally wearing a collar around his neck, which is quite the symbol. But we also see it in Zelda and Giles. So Zelda speaks a lot, but she's rarely listened to. She's a Black woman working and taking care of her house at the same time. She has no voice. Even when Strickland confronts her, he breaks into her house looking for information about the amphibian man. And he is threatening her and confronting her. She doesn't even say anything. Her husband talks over her and reveals the secret, reveals the answer despite her wishes. Mm-hmm. He silences her and does what he wants. Then we have Giles, who's a struggling artist that no one really wants to listen to anymore. He's kind of become a relic. His art isn't being bought anymore because photography is more appealing. He goes to a terrible diner just to talk with the man behind the counter. He just wants to be listened to. He babbles on to Elisa because she listens to him, but he doesn't have interaction. No one's paying attention to him.
Right.
And then when he does try to take the relationship with the man behind the counter forward, he's not only rebuffed, but he's vilified. That man refuses service to a black couple and also kicks Giles out for being gay. All of these are instances of people's voice being stolen from them, their choices being eliminated, their freedoms being restricted.
Right. And it's done in a way that's so cohesive with the rest of the story.
Exactly.
Like it doesn't ever feel like we're just seeing sort of vignettes of these people's lives. It's all tied in very well with the plot and showing us how the characters develop over the course of the story. Exactly. So we get those themes through the plot and the characters, which I think is just brilliant, as opposed to sort of, just like blurting it out. Right.
Yeah, it's not vignettes. It's not, clearly Zelda isn't being heard by her husband. It's how does her husband further the story while also not listening to her.
Right.
And it ties into like the plot and the character arc. It's really great. So whether or not the viewers have felt this overt silencing, they can relate to the struggle to be heard. Mm-hmm. Most people can relate to that and really feel that. So whether or not they've experienced anything that happens in the movie, they can relate to the theme, and it really hits home on an emotional, connected level.
Right. I don't think most of us have fallen in love with a fish man.
I mean, speak for yourself.
I said most.
Okay. That's fair.
I've never worked at a secret government facility either.
You're missing out.
Don't talk about it, Carly.
I mean, let's restart this podcast. So then we have the who is the real monster theme, which is definitely the Beauty and the Beast theme that we're kind of getting from this whole story. So it's very much shown, obviously, through the amphibian man, but also the Russians and Strickland. So Strickland is truly an awful person.
He really is. They show that in so many ways.
So many ways. Like, almost too many ways, but not as a criticism, but so many ways.
Yeah.
But he's also just trying to keep his job. Like, he has that moment with his boss where he's like, I did my best. Like, doesn't my past speak for itself? And his boss is like, no, do better or you're fired or killed or whatever. I forget what it was. All of the above, probably. And then we have the amphibian man, who is very clearly a victim, but he can also be harmful. Like, he does kill Strickland in the end. I mean, rightfully so, but he does. Right. He harms Giles and Giles's pet.
Don't talk about it.
We don't want to talk about. My husband had to look away from the screen. He couldn't handle it.
Yeah. There is one scene with a cat. It's not super graphic, I think.
It's not. It's just sad.
It's the idea of it.
Yeah. And then we have the Russians or the Soviets, who aren't any better than Strickland. They're willing to kill to keep information from the Americans. But then there's Hofstetler, who wants to save him. And you assume in the beginning that he's also pretty evil. Mm-hmm. But we slowly see that he's not. He's in it for the science and learning and stuff like that. So how do we take that into your writing. So first, we need to figure out what you're trying to show with your manuscript. What do you want your readers to come away from your manuscript feeling and understanding? It can be as simple as everyone deserves love, or it can be as complex as the voiceless deserve to be heard, or even more complex because my head is too full of this movie, so I can't think of other examples, even though there's a million. So once you figure out what you want your readers to feel, then you need to think of how your plot and characters can convey that. So does your overall plot show that everyone deserves to be heard? If yes, how? And what subplots or side characters can reinforce this theme? We don't have only Elisa being voiceless. We see voicelessness in all of her side characters. Even Strickland, who gets shut down by his boss. So you want to layer in different aspects of it and what other forms of being silent that you can kind of layer in.
Right. Yeah, gosh, that's a lot to think about. You just gave them all a whole bunch of homework.
I did. Figure out everything.
Yeah.
From my whole
all
speech.
The deep stuff. This episode is about all the deep stuff, for sure.
Yeah.
So sometimes authors ask me if they're commercial genre fiction, and that is as opposed to literary fiction, story even needs a theme. Isn't theme just for classics that you learn to dissect in school? But the truth is that every story has a theme, no matter the genre, age category, length, any other defining trait. And the super fun thing about theme is that because it speaks to the human condition, sometimes readers will find themes that you, as the author, didn't even intend. But you do intend themes in your story as well, even if you don't realize it, because that theme is what touches your readers. It's what makes readers connect and engage. Theme is important because it adds this deeper layer of meaning to your story. It's what makes a story feel like it connects with our lives, why stories stick with us over the course of years. I think it's one reason why kid lit is so important. Children's books are so important because, we those of us who continue to read our whole lives, we're always taking in that information and it's helping us process the world around us and ourselves. But when you're a kid, it can be so important, such a foundational part of who you become.
Yes.
In the kind of media that you take in. Which is just a little side note about how much I love kidlit and how important it is. But yeah, so that's what makes us stories really stick with us. And that deeper understanding of life and ourselves that we can take from stories is what makes them so special and important to us throughout our lives, not just in kidlit. Theme also helps readers understand the story on another level. So that connection between what we read and our own quest for meaning, whatever that looks like for each of us, gives us a whole other way of engaging with a story. I think what's really cool is when I don't know if you, Carly, do you ever reread stories? Have you reread stories before?
Yes.
Yeah.
Not super often. There's too much to read, but yes.
Exactly. I think it's really cool to revisit a book that you haven't read in a long time because you'll almost always get new things from it because you've had different experiences in the meantime.
Totally.
I think that it's one way that classics are, I don't want to say wasted, but in some ways almost wasted on teenagers and people who don't have a lot of life experience yet, because it can be difficult to connect with those deeper themes when you haven't experienced a lot of loss or regret or some of those more difficult human emotions yet.
Right.
Anyway, I feel like I'm just going to keep talking about kidlit and teenagers this whole time.
I mean, that's fine. Reading teaches them empathy. It's what we all need.
It does. So, well, and what I'm thinking of specifically in terms of classic literature is that I went back to college in my 30s, my early 30s, and I did resonate. Even the stories I didn't like resonated with me on a much deeper level. And there was one book I reread in college that I had read in high school, which is Like Water for Chocolate. And I had liked it when I read it in high school. But there was so much of it that I just didn't have the life experience to really connect with on that deeper thematic level. So when I read it as an adult, I could really understand the power of it in a way that just didn't come through to me as a teenager.
Right.
So it makes me think, there's a whole conversation about should we read classics, should we not read classics? But I think that it can be very valuable to revisit those as an adult if you haven't read them since you were a teenager or in your early 20s in college.
Agreed.
So, okay, what was I talking about? Gives us a whole other way, I was talking about theme. Thanks for that.
The whole theme of this podcast is theme, Jenny.
Gosh, you totally just blew my mind. It's like themeception.
Yep. That's what we're calling this episode. Themeception.
So that connection we feel between our own quest for meaning and what we see in books can be so full of meaning. Think about the ways that your favorite books have changed you. Was it the actual events of the plot that held such meaning for you? Or was it something deeper about life that you took away from the book? Lastly, theme can help you keep your book more focused. If you know you're writing about letting go, for example, the character arc and plot will relate to that. And when you're feeling stuck, you can go back to that theme and ask yourself what does or doesn't belong in the story.
Agreed. So kind of going off what you're talking about, how do we then develop your novel's main theme, like behind the scenes, not just in your text? So think about the books that you've read that you've loved, as Jenny said. When you put them down, what did they really make you feel? What did they make you think about? Now, what message do you want your readers thinking about when they put your book down? This is actually one of the first questions I ask any potential authors that I'm going to work with is, what are you trying to convey with your book? What do you want readers to feel from it? What kind of message are you trying to get across? What kind of theme are you going for? So what is important to you and why are you writing this book? Once you kind of know that, you'll know what themes to put your energy into. So it's all about finding what's important and what piece of yourself you want to share. So themes can vary from showing a certain experience so that others can understand it, to showing a feeling that connects people. I mean, it's basically anything Jenny was kind of talking about is what do we connect with on a deeper level. Then take your theme and find ways that your plot and characters can kind of tie into it. So what is your story arc and how does it convey your theme? What other forms of your theme that do you have that you can apply to your characters? So if your theme is, say, love conquers all, then by the end of your story, your main characters need to have overcome huge obstacles to be together. But some of your side characters can also show that in smaller ways by like choosing love over a job, or they can choose the job over love but wish they had gone the other way. You can highlight your theme by also showing the antithesis of it and what happens if someone doesn't adhere to the theme that you've set forth, and how does it turn out possibly poorly for them. So you kind of want to tie your plot and characters to your theme by coming at it from multiple angles and perspectives, and make sure your characters are all building on your theme in kind of in different ways, because if it's all one note, it gets very all one note. But there's every kind of theme has different ways that you can come at it and different viewpoints and different perspectives.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And like you were saying earlier, we saw some of these themes in multiple characters, even characters that maybe we didn't like. We could see some of these themes in their parts of the story, in their character development arcs. We can see how that theme of, say, like feeling unheard and silenced makes different characters react in different ways. So I think, it's absolutely so important to think about first identifying your theme, developing it, and then figuring out how it connects to those plot and character arcs. So then when you're actually ready to like sit down and draft your novel, my best advice is to think of theme as secondary to plot and character. And that's because if you don't, it's going to feel like you're writing theme. It's going to feel like you're writing like the theme of my story is love conquers all.
Yep.
And instead, we do want to work on how we're showing that through characters' interactions, their decisions, what happens to them, how they react to what happens to them, all of those things. So if you know how these elements are connected, you'll already be laying a solid foundation for your theme. Honestly, this is how you end up with themes that you don't intend to have. It's all those little connections, all the ways you work to make your story reflect real life and real experiences. And then readers come along with their own lived experiences and connect with different elements of the story. And so I think that's one thing, and I think maybe we've talked about it on here before, about just how cool reading and writing is that it becomes this interactive thing, even though both aspects of it are done usually in isolation.
I know, it's so cool.
It really is this very unique kind of magic. So try not to stress about whether or not your theme is strong enough while you're drafting. When you get to the point of revising, make sure you're keeping the theme in mind with your character reactions. Some of the most quotable lines in literature come from narrators expressing that theme in just tiny bits of like thoughts, judgments, or opinions, just sort of these like tiny moments of reflection can really yield these really deep, memorable lines in books.
One of my favorite things is a judgy narrator.
Right? They're the best.
They're the best.
And then, so once you've kind of looked through it all on your own, doing your self-revisions, then you want to make sure you ask about theme when you get feedback from beta readers and critique partners. If they're understanding your theme, they're feeling connected to it, then you've likely done your job. And if not, then you might need to go back and look at that theme again and how you're expressing it.
Yeah, agreed. And there's a lot of pitfalls to themes. Like, don't get us wrong. It's important. Put your effort into it. But you can overdo it, kind of like what Jenny was saying. You don't want your reader to feel like lectured or beat over the head with your theme. You want them to experience your theme. They're not being told it. They're not learning it from a lecture. So, because lecturing your readers never goes well. And theme is, you basically want to think of theme as the epitome of show don't tell. You almost never want to tell it.
I think that's like the deep snippet of short, judgy narrator.
Yeah.
That's the theme of our show, Themeception.
Themeception.
Yeah.
Show don't tell your theme.
Theme is the epitome of show don't tell.
There you go.
Yeah.
Themeception. But so
excuse me, I'm gonna go and like sit in a corner and stare at the wall.
We're all gonna have some existential crises after this. It's okay. So if your theme is overt, your readers are gonna get bored or uninterested, and they'll be like, yeah, I know love conquers all, blah blah blah. And the other pitfall is that they can sometimes be restrictive. So while, like Jenny said, they can help you get over a block, they can also become an obstacle themselves. Don't be afraid to revise your theme. We all grow and learn, and you might not have the same goals at the end of the manuscript as you did when you began writing. So be open to adapting and be open to moving on and seeing what you've learned and what you have ended with over the course of your writing journey, because writing is a whole journey unto itself.
You know, as you were talking about the theme and I was getting all like existentially, I was thinking about how the oldest stories, and by that I mean myths, legends, folklore, fairy tales, all of those kind of stories are about imparting a theme in a way that isn't lecturing. So
Yes.
let's take fairy tales, for example. You know, you can tell your kids, hey, scary stuff is going to happen if you go out in the woods by yourself. And
Yeah.
they'll be like, yeah, I've heard that a million times. But if you bring them up telling them stories about how a witch lives in the wood who eats kids, then that really gets to them on a visceral level.
Yeah.
Traumatizes
why
them, so
don't
they stay away in the woods.
Don't take candy from strangers because it'll be a witch that wants to eat you. Obviously.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly.
No, exactly. That's what the whole point of fairy tales is.
But that's really, I think, a very simplified way of looking at theme is, you know, when you look at myths, legends, folklore, fairy tales, these oldest forms of stories that we have written down, it really comes back to we are trying to convey something about the human experience. Sometimes very simple things like don't go in the woods, sometimes much more complicated things. And it reaches a different part of us. It reaches us on a deeper level when we convey it through story as opposed to lecturing or just being told. So I think keep that in mind as you're working through your theme.
Yeah, that's kind of where the learned empathy kind of comes in, is the more you read, the more you internalize these themes and the more you learn to understand others and things like that. It's really...
Right.
Theme is important in everything. Man.
It is. And I think it can be so, gosh, we could do a whole episode, I think, about learned empathy and how that, we might have to. Put that on the list, Carly.
Okay, I'm writing it down.
I think that's so important. And it's why it's so important to read outside of your own lived experiences.
Yes,
you know?
definitely.
Besides it being like an escape or an opportunity for you to learn more about other cultures or other time periods or whatever, it definitely gives you a different sense of empathy.
I feel like we both need to go, like, take a nap after this episode. I feel like we've gone somewhere deep. It's like after therapy or something. I don't know.
I just need to, like, go light a candle in a dark room.
Yeah, let's go, like, do some
meditation on this for a while.
Yeah.
Okay.
I hope you listeners at home have a chance to now go meditate.
We'll have to go back and add in, like, a note at the beginning that says, you know, you might want
After
to,
this
like,
episode,
light a
you need
candle.
Yeah. The candle was the only important part.
We just
obviously.
won't even tell them why. Just, you need a candle.
Just, you need a candle for this episode. Yeah. All right. So, moving on from theme. This month, we have a query from a young adult fantasy. What are your thoughts on it?
My first thought is, you thought we were moving away from theme, but I'm about to bring it right back around.
Here we go. Let's do it. Get more candles.
Queries are a great way to unlock the theme of your story, if you haven't already, truly. Because you have to focus on the most significant, meaningful elements of your story. It can really help you narrow your focus when you're thinking about theme. That's all I'm going to say about theme, though. I'm not going to talk about it anymore.
I'm just trying not to laugh at coming back around, but continue.
For this query specifically, I wanted a little more detail, a little more specificity. There are mentions of powers, but we don't know what those powers are or why they matter or how they affect this protagonist on a personal level. So while we don't want all the focus for the whole query to go to the powers, we do need to understand them in the larger context of the story, and having that little bit of more detail in that would really help.
Yeah, I agree. My main suggestion was to focus more on the emotional stakes and the substance of the story. So, like, those kind of details and more of that, like, connective tissue. So this query has a lot of setup and logistics that don't really show us who your character is on a personal level. They show us the frame of your story without any of the pictures that fill it in. So, who is your character, and most importantly, why does this story matter to them? We need to connect with the character in a really short time in a query. Like, you got a couple paragraphs, that's it. So utilize your word count and gear it towards the why it matters instead of the how it matters.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to think about it, is the only real setup we need here is we just need to have enough context that we can understand why it matters, why we should care. Like, not only why does it matter to the character, but why should the reader care? Why should it matter to us?
Jenny, I feel like you're liking a lot of my one-liners this episode, and I'm like super flattered.
Should I say something mean now? I feel like I should.
No, you can let me be flattered. You're
okay. Smart, Carly. Sometimes you say smart things.
Oh, see, sometimes you got undercut it right there. Good job.
The theme of that was...
Most of the time, Carly, you don't say smart things. But sometimes you do. All right. So, on our next podcast, we will be discussing the teen drama, The Sun is Also a Star, the movie, not the book. We will also have another query or blurb critique. So if you want your query featured on the podcast, you can find the details about how to do that on our website or Twitter page.
You can find our podcast on our website, storychatradio.com, or you can follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Play Music, or many other streaming services. While you're there, please leave us a rating. You can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram at StoryChatRadio.
Thanks for joining in our nonsense.